Okay, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Let me get through here. Okay, and happy holidays to everybody. The holidays all next Wednesday. So we're here today, and I was going to do 1902, but 1901 is probably more interesting because it was the first year of the 20th century. You know, the centuries end in the 00, so theoretically, the 20th century ended in the year 2000. This is the first year of the 20th century, and it was pivotal because William McKinley is assassinated. If he's not assassinated, you don't get Theodore Roosevelt. So here he is in Buffalo. Buffalo at one time had more millionaires per capita than any other city in the United States, because the end of the Erie Canal and sending all the goods going out to the Midwest, and also there were flour factories and other things in Buffalo. And that's why William McKinley was in Buffalo in 1901 in September. Theodore Roosevelt would become President of the United States. United States Steel Corporation, which Eisenhower once said the business of the country is the business of the country, referring to General Motors and U.S. Steel in the 1950s. Well, the U.S. Steel Company is formed in 1901. Radio sort of, the radio sort of debuts in 1901, but not with any voices, but radio signals are established, and that's where I Playland a couple of years ago with a transistor radio. How many of you own transistor radios? I gave a talk about transistor radios 10 days ago, and there was an aide in there and said, "What is a transistor radio?" Anyway, don't speed in Connecticut. There were speed limits in Connecticut in 1901, and Wilton, Westport, Wilton Road, Route 33, next right. Must have been a slow day. One car on the road on the Merritt Parkway. Also, in Texas, Gusher oil is discovered in Texas. And the American League in Baseball is formed. This is me. This is about 35 years ago. And I'm talking to Sparky Lyle there. But the American League in Baseball starts in 1901. McKinley is assassinated, and most of 1901 is going to be about the quick change and also anarchists running around the world. Here's McKinley. He's assassinated in September of 1901. By 1894, William McKinley was considered a likely presidential candidate, especially after being elected Ohio governor in 1891 and 1893. However, he almost got derailed because he signed loans or co-signed loans of a friend, and there were demands for repayment made on him when his friend went bankrupt during the panic of 1893. There were a lot of panics. There was a panic of 1873, 1893. There would be one in 1907, and of course the Great Depression in 1912. Personal insolvency would have removed McKinley as a factor in the 1896 campaign, but he was rescued by a businessman who supported him, led by his friend and political manager Mark Hanna. And how many of you enjoyed getting all kind of political stuff in your mailbox? Which I'm sure you don't, because I got one yesterday and I immediately threw it out because I live in New York and the 2025 gubernatorial race has already started. But that guy Mark Hanna is the guy who first started stuffing your mailbox with information. McKinley pushed the Republicans' party platform to include protective tariffs. That's coming back 128 years later. By 1896, the Republican Party was ready to present itself as standing behind the farmer, the rising middle class, the Protestant industrial workers through higher taxes on foreign imports. McKinley also avoided the money question as he was running for re-election. He didn't want to talk about gold, didn't want to talk about silver. He thought, nobody cares about cash. This would be an important asset in the election. where McKinley's opponent, William Jennings Bryan, focused almost entirely on the issue in the 1896 campaign. So, you got William McKinley. Now, who is this guy McKinley, and why is he so important in American history? Well, he actually is very important, even though he is totally forgotten today. He's extremely important. McKinley began his military career in June 1861 as a private in the 23rd Ohio Infantry. He was a Civil War hero for the Union Army. He became a lawyer after the war, settled in Canton, Ohio, where he married and assumed a variety of community leadership roles. He became active in Republican Party circles, which led to his election as the Stark County prosecutor in 1896. He was elected to Congress in 1877 and again in 1885, and he served 2 terms as governor, being elected in 1891 and 1893. He was an abolitionist, and he was raised that way because his Methodist mother in Poland, Ohio, was against slavery. He was sympathetic to the cause of African Americans who struggled under the Jim Crow system of being second-class citizens in the South. Well, this is the Virgin Islands, and McKinley had his eye on the Virgin Islands, among other things. The Republican platform favored the gold standard, but left the door open to free coinage of silver, and that was the big thing in 1896 because of money. The party also had expansionism as part of its platform. The Republicans supported the acquisition of Hawaii and parts of the Danish West Indies, also known as the Virgin Islands. Favored the canal across Central America. Well, it might have been Nicaragua, but it ended up Panama. Naval expansion. They sympathized with revolutionaries in Cuba and Armenia. It also wanted exclusion of all illiterate immigrants, while applauding gains in women's rights and pledged equal pay for equal work. If you're thinking that this sounds a little bit like modern America, you're absolutely right. William McKinley is trying to usher in modern America in 1896. So who was this guy? Well, he wanted to expand the Republican base beyond the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant core. He had an opportunity at the St. Louis GOP convention to make good on that promise. Rabbi Samuel Sale delivered the first day invocation. His selection was engineered by the managers of his political campaign. The Republican Party consisted of upscale Catholics and Protestant members of the staunchly anti-Catholic American Protective Association. So they hoped by bringing a rabbi in, they could soothe all the feathers of everybody who was upset, the Protestants and the Catholics. And this guy, Sale, well, his family were members of the Democratic Party. Whether they satisfied both camps or not is still open to question. McKinley put together a coalition that included Croatian mine workers, German dairymen's groups, Swedish lumbermen, the Italian Glassmakers Guild, Confederate soldiers. He wanted to get new faces in the Republican Party. His message is, we're all in this together, while William Jennings Bryan's message is, it's us against them mentality. And when he meant the us against them mentality, the city slickers against the rural community. So who was William Jennings Bryan? Well, William Jennings Bryan was a young guy, really young. He barely made the age to run for president. He was only 36. He was born in Salem, Illinois, March 19, 1860, graduated from Illinois College in 1881, and from the Union College of Law in 1883. He was admitted to the Illinois State Bar in 1883, practiced law in Jacksonville, Illinois, prior to moving to Lincoln, Nebraska in 1887. The Nebraskan Bryan won election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1890. He would stay there until 1895, and he was a populist. And he was championing free coinage of silver. 16 silver pieces equal 1 gold piece. He wanted a national income tax. He wanted a national income tax and direct election of senators. Back in those days, the state legislature would select who would go to the Senate from that particular state. Since 1893, America had been mired in a deep economic depression marked by lower prices, low profits, high unemployment, and violent strikes. Economic issues, especially silver or gold, for the money supply and tariffs were central. Every election is always about money. It's always about money. In 1896, many inflationist farmers believed that by increasing the amount of currency in circulation, the crops they grew would get higher prices. They were opposed by banks and bondholders who feared inflation, and by urban workers, city slickers, who feared inflation would further erode their purchasing power. This is the candidate Bryan. He is 36 years old. In 1896, William Jennings Bryan faced an uphill battle as a Democrat and populist nominee. Democrats held the White House for the previous 4 years and were blamed for the economic depression in 1893. Early 1895, Congressman Richard Bland of Missouri and Bryan, then a former congressman, led the revolt against the president, Grover Cleveland. They argued that Cleveland's economic policies did not represent the party's mainstream support of free silver. Bryan promoted a statement signed by 31 House Democrats urging Democrats to become the party of free silver, something which Grover Cleveland did not agree with. 16-1, 16 pieces of silver and equals 1 piece of gold. That summer, Bryan conducted a successful speaking tour in the Midwest and the South. He attacked the money power in Washington. Sounded like Bernie Sanders, didn't he? Just like Bernie Sanders. And called for new party leadership. You hear that all the time. Silver Democrats attempted to take control of the party's national organization, but Bryan worked alone to build a national free silver coalition of Democrats, Republicans, and populists. And there's Grover Cleveland. That is Grover Cleveland's home in West Caldwell, New Jersey. And it's basically 2 rooms. And the woman who was the curator said to me, here's a cane, here's a hat. Why don't you do those steps, Anyway, but there I am in those hats which you don't see anymore, carrying the stick. Anyway, and there was Grover Cleveland, and that's where he lived as a child in New Jersey. President Grover Cleveland disapproved of Bryan's nomination. Many Democrats abandoned the party to form Gold Democrats or vote for McKinley. Bryan, who barely acknowledged his nomination by the third-party populists, decided the best strategy for a Democratic victory was to bring his message to the people by speaking around the country, often from the backs of railroad cars. Whistle stops. He invents the whistle stop. This was a new tactic since presidential candidates traditionally stayed home and let others speak on their behalf. It was Bryan who would get both criticism and fame from that. In a sense, the 1896 election is the first modern presidential election. They're out on the whistle stop. You're getting stuff in the mail. That stuff is still used 128 years later. It was the first time the presidential candidate hit the trail and pressed the flesh. And this is a caricature of Bryan, who's got to serve all kinds of people, populist, the Democrat, and it's called the Free Silver Frankenstein, as he tries to figure out what to do. Democrats arrived in Chicago without a clear choice for their nomination. Congressman Richard P. Bland of Missouri was the leading candidate, but the populists were hoping for a more free silver candidate. And also, they didn't like Bland. Why? His wife was a Catholic. So that's a non-starter for the populists. Bryan had taken advantage of all the attention his work had given him the previous year and began writing delegates for support that spring. Although some delegates from the West and the South intended to vote for him, a pre-convention poll just 2 days before the convention's opening ranked him last among the 7 candidates. On July 7th, the convention opened with civil rights, establishing clear control. They eliminated 2 candidates, adopted a free silver plank that had been written by Bryan. And he gives probably one of the most famous speeches, at least if you take speech, and I did. This is one of the ones that you have to know. It's called the Cross of Gold speech. About 8 months ago, I had a guy who's in his 90s who recited it for me. It is one of the classic presidential nomination speeches of all time. Except I don't know, because I don't have any kids in school now, and I don't know what the curriculum is now. Bryan blamed the gold standard for impoverishing Americans and identified agriculture as the foundation of American wealth. You can see it is the bankers against Bryan, because Wall Street is there at this point. He called for reform of the monetary system into the gold standard, promised government relief efforts for farmers and others hurt by the economic depression. And this is the Cross of Gold speech. Having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interest, the laboring interest, and toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. This speech in his day was considered magnificent. He took the lead on the 4th ballot and finally won the nomination on the 5th. He's 36 years old. He becomes the youngest candidate ever nominated for the presidency of the United States. Some Democrats broke with the mainstream party. Some in the Northeast privately and even publicly supported the Republican ticket led by McKinley, while some in the Midwest formed their own party, known as the National Democratic Party. In early September, the Democratic breakaway faction convened in Indianapolis. They nominated John Palmer, a senator from Illinois, for president, and Simon Bolivar Buckner, a former Confederate general and governor of Kentucky, for vice president. And here is Bryan trying to do his balancing act. Meanwhile, what is McKinley doing? Sitting at home, not doing much of anything. He's sitting at home. The Populist Party grew out of the agriculture discontent of the 1890s, especially in the South and the west of the Mississippi River. It grew out of the Farmers Alliance, whose main goal since 1876 had been to achieve economic reform in railroad and brokerage rates. By 1896, following the panic of 1893, the party had almost become exclusively identified with the free silver movement. The inclusion of populist positions in the Democratic platform caused a split in the Populist Party. Some populists, called fusionists, wanted to join the Democrats. The more radical mid-roaders wanted to remain as a separate organization and pursue a larger agenda. At the convention in St. Louis, the populists passed a wide-ranging reform platform, nominated Bryan for president. The mid-roaders started an anti-Bryan protest, but it was cut short when the lights were turned on. The lights turned on. That means get out of here. They turned the lights on me. Just let me know and I'll get out. They succeeded in opposing Bryan's running mate on the Democratic ticket, Arthur Sewall. He was seen as too anti-labor and instead nominated Thomas E. Watson, former populist congressman from Georgia. Except Watson refused to campaign for Bryan. So he's got a problem. He's got an unpopular vice presidential candidate on the Democrats, and he's got this vice presidential candidate from the populists who said, I'm not campaigning for him. I don't want him. Anyway, it's the Gilded Age and robber barons, and there is Brian. And of course, Brian would be against the Gilded Age and the barons. This, by the way, is a sign in a museum on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The big industrialists and the bankers of the late 19th century grew deeply concerned with the outcome of the election of 1896 when the Democratic Party chose Brian as its nominee. Brian also despised powerful business interests, the railroads, the industrialists, the financiers, all part of the robber baron class, or the Gilded Age. In particular, he attacked the monopolies or trusts that the robber barons had created to minimize competition and maximize profits. Brian's presidency represented a major threat to these business interests. So you're going to need somebody from central casting, a villain, to counteract Brian, right? The big money interests at first ignored the obscure Nebraska congressman, but he had a secret weapon. He could talk. He was an exceptional orator, and he went on a non-stop campaign covering 18,000 miles in 3 months, whipping up support with his populist message. The robber barons were alarmed. Well, you need somebody to stop the robber barons' worries and to get rid of Brian. Well, in comes this guy, Mark Hanna, right out of central casting, and the guy who modernized presidential campaigns in 1896 that every one of us in this room suffer from. And I'll show you how he did it on McKinley's behalf. He was 58 years old. He was an industrialist who promoted McKinley in the election and was the pioneer of getting big business and its dollars into American politics. Anybody upset that big business has so much influence in American politics in here? I see a couple heads shaking. To get McKinley to be the Republican nominated, Hanna used every way he could to sway delegates. He gained support of Southerners by promising the rewards of patronage. You elect McKinley, you get a job. He pledged to the Eastern delegates strong support for the gold standard currency. This tactic put Hanna's campaign at odds with silver Republicans in Western states, but that didn't matter because the West wasn't really populated. But it shored up the winning coalition that got McKinley nominated on the first ballot. Hanna was said to have poured more than $100,000, about $3.6 million in today's cash, of his own money into the campaign. McKinley's campaign received unprecedented funding from wealthy individuals and corporations. And Hanna starts with an old high school classmate. Now, I don't know if he did this on the phone, did this in person, or wrote him a letter, but he said, "Hey, J.D., John D. Rockefeller, hey, how you doing? Listen, you got Standard Oil. This guy, Brian, he's going to want to tear apart Standard Oil. So, how much can you give me to stop him? $250,000. $9.1 million today? Sold. J.P. Morgan. Hey, Mark, how you doing? Doing well, and you? Oh, by the way, I need some money. Well, J.P. Morgan, here's $250,000 as well. $9.1 million in today's money. Brian's most likely largest donor was the newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst, who had newspapers all over the place. Gave him $40,000, about $1.46 million in today's money, but Hearst would attack McKinley in print. And there is Mark Hanna. And Mark Hanna was once asked, what's the most important thing in politics? This is 1895. He said, there are two things that are important in politics. The first is money, and I can't remember what the second one is. Hanna directed about $3.5 million, about $128 million today, which is about 1/10 of what you spend today, in the campaign, the costliest and best organized national campaign ever witnessed. McKinley outspent Brian 20-1. Hanna hired 1,400 people, inundated the country with millions of pamphlets promising continuing prosperity with McKinley, all in your mailbox. All of it went in your mailbox. It was the start of a new direction in campaigning. Having surrogates talk for the candidate and send direct mailings out to households to vote for McKinley. So was McKinley Hannah's puppet? Well, some people, some newspaper cartoonists said, yeah. And of course, here is his cufflink with a $sign on it. Bryant traveled 18,000 miles across the country, gave that cross of gold speech 600 times. Meanwhile, McKinley, he sat home, didn't bother campaigning. You went to him, he didn't go to you. So he had trainloads of people coming to meet him in Canton, Ohio. And Hannah kind of paid these people to come to see William McKinley. McKinley gave about 300 front porch speeches. He never left Canton, Ohio. He just stayed there and you came to him. Hannah succeeded in stunting Bryant's grassroots appeal with a continual barrage of posters and propaganda that preceded and followed Bryant at every whistle stop of his campaign trail. Hannah's political power was ridiculed by cartoonists who called him Dollar Mark. Here you go. Want to go see William McKinley running for president? Well, there you are. There he is sitting in the front row. Trainload upon trainload, 6 days a week, never on Sunday. That was a song, wasn't it? Never on Sunday? Never on Sunday. He needed rest from campaigning, sitting there. McKinley made himself available to the public every day except Sunday, receiving delegations from the front porch of his home. The railroads subsidized the visitors. The railroads wanted McKinley, so they cut the rates. So you could get there at a cut rate price because they wanted McKinley. Hey, you know what? Let's see, going to Canton? $3? Yeah, we'll do it. What's that, normally 12? Anyway, railroads subsidized the visitors with low excursion rates. The pro-silver Cleveland Plain Dealer, and I wrote a few op-ed pieces for the Cleveland Plain Dealer in the 21st century, disgustingly stated that going to Canton had been made cheaper than staying at home. Delegations marched through the streets from the railroad station to McKinley's home on North Market Street. Once there, they crowded close to the front porch. Their spokesman addressed McKinley. The candidate responded, speaking on campaign issues in a speech molded to suit the interest of whoever was there that day. The speeches were craftily scripted to avoid off-the-cuff remarks. Even the spokesman's remarks were approved by McKinley or his representative. Well, it was all about money. And William McKinley would win, and William McKinley would start the modernization of the White House in March of 1897. McKinley thought of himself as a tariff man. Tariffs were good. And expected that the monetary issue would fade away in a month. He was mistaken. Silver and gold dominated the campaign. The battleground? The Midwest. Seems like that's the battleground all the time. The South and most of the West were conceded to Bryant, but there weren't people living there. The Democrats spent much of his time in those crucial states. The Northeast was most likely safe for McKinley. That's where all the people were. New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. And the early voting states of Maine and Vermont supported him in September, and that bared it out. Republicans managed to attract some urban progressives by attacking Bryant as a religious fanatic. And they painted a dire picture of what abandoning the gold standard would mean for the economy. Here is Puck. McKinley's all way down, and Puck was a magazine in those days, and there is Bryant, and it says, Bryant is the ablest worker for sound money. So Puck was supporting Bryant. On November 3rd, the voters had their say. McKinley won the entire Northeast and Midwest, got 51% of the vote, and an ample majority in the Electoral College. McKinley gained strength from prosperous Midwestern farmers, industrial workers, and many ethnic voters. Bryant concentrated solely on the silver issue. He did not appeal to urban workers. Voters in cities supported McKinley. The only city outside of the South with a population of more than 100,000 carried by Bryant was in Denver, Colorado. Well, McKinley ushers in a change in America. And that is the Williamsburg Bridge, which actually started in 1893 in Manhattan, and at that point, Brooklyn was a separate city. It was, if Brooklyn remained, anybody here from Brooklyn? Nobody. Well, Brooklyn remained a separate city from Manhattan and the Bronx, which was New York City. It'd be the third largest city in America. The 1896 election marked the decisive triumph of the nation's urban interests, the bankers, the manufacturers, and industries over the agricultural sector. With Americans migrating to cities at a rapidly increasing rate in the last decade of the 19th century, Bryant would be the last candidate running, appealing exclusively to the rural population. The bad economy powered McKinley to a victory on the strength of the electoral map. The unemployment rate when he took over was 12.4%. By the time he had to run for re-election, it was 5%. And he would go against Bryant in a rematch, and he'd crush him. McKinley got lucky. There was a gold rush in the Klondike that helped stabilize the American economy, built up cities like Seattle and San Francisco, because that's where you got your supplies to go to the Klondike. He also began flexing America's military muscle beyond North America, with Hawaii and Cuba in his sight. Well, I should say that John Tyler, who was president in 1842, wanted Hawaii strategically, so America could control interests in Asia. That is Puerto Rico. America is changing. McKinley would lead the way to American imperialism and colonialism. A war with Spain would get America Puerto Rico, Guam, and Cuba, as well as the Philippines. America was expanding. It would start with the military occupation of Manila, then the annexation of the entire Philippines, annexing Hawaii. Tyler, Tippecanoe, and Tyler too. Well, without Tippecanoe, William Harrison. Beginning in 1842, President John Tyler gave notice to European nations that the United States would never consent to their occupying the Hawaiian Islands. The Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, in 1842, sends a letter to Hawaiian agents in Washington affirming U.S. interests in Hawaii and opposing annexation by any other nation. For the better part of the 19th century, leaders in Washington were concerned that Hawaii might become part of a European nation's empire. During the 1830s, Britain and France forced Hawaii to accept treaties giving them economic privileges. Remember, this is the Kingdom of Hawaii. Webster also proposed to Great Britain and France that no nation should seek special privileges or engage in further colonization of the islands. 1849, the United States and Hawaii concluded a treaty of friendship that served as the basis of official relations between the parties. Napoleon III in France said, nope, I'm not going to listen, but Webster, still the Secretary of State, 1851, when the French were threatening to occupy Hawaii, said or wrote, I hope the French will not take possession of Hawaii. But if they do, they will be dislodged. If my advice is taken, if the whole power of the government is required to do it. Webster's vision was this: Pearl Harbor. It wasn't Pearl Harbor in those days, it was just a little harbor in Oahu, but he wanted to get American naval ships into this area. Hawaii would give America a place where a defense base could be located and an opportunity to control the Pacific. That would not come, though, for decades. The Queen and the Kingdom of Hawaii are knocked off in 1893. On January 14th, 1893, a group of mostly Euro-American business leaders in residence formed the Committee of Safety, the Sugar Lobby. Why? There were tariffs on sugar from foreign countries, and these guys couldn't get their product into America because the tariffs were so high. So they said, you know what? Let's have a coup against the kingdom and let the United States take us over. United States Government Minister John L. Stevens responded to a request from the Committee of Safety, summoned a company of Marines, and that is what they stormed the palace. A descendant of the American missionary community to Hawaii, Samuel B. Dole, not the pineapple guy, he's a different guy, advocated the westernization and destruction of the Hawaiian government and culture. After the overthrow of the monarchy, he served as president of Hawaii until his government secured Hawaii's annexation by the United States. Looks like one of the Smith brothers at Sanford B. Dole. He was a lawyer. He was an American lawyer, became the president of the Republic when the provisional government of Hawaii ended on July 4th, 1894. Controversy ensued in the following years as the Queen tried to regain her throne. She appealed to this guy, Grover Cleveland, President of the United States, but he's toothless in this whole ordeal. The administration of President Grover Cleveland commissioned the Blount Report, which concluded that the removal of the Queen had been illegal. The U.S. government said the Queen must be reinstated. Instead, she got arrested and served some time because of treason to the Republic of Hawaii, but the provisional government refused. And that is now the Hawaiian Republic. Lord A. Thurston declined the presidency of the Republic, and Dole was chosen to lead the government instead. He's the president from 1894 to 1898 when it ended, that country. Dole in turn appointed Thurston to lead a lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. and secure Hawaii's annexation. Dole was successful as a diplomat. Every nation that recognized the Kingdom of Hawaii also recognized the Republic. That's the McKinley statue in Buffalo. When I took my son up in 2002, 2003 as a tour of upstate New York to see what college he was going to go to. McKinley was open to persuasion by U.S. expansionists and annexationists from Hawaii. He met with Thurston, Francis March Hatch, and William Ansel Kinney. After negotiations in June of 1897, the Secretary of State, John Sherman, agreed to treaty of annexation with the representatives of the Republic of Hawaii. Well, Spain and the United States aren't getting along, and there was a ship called the Maine that was blown up, or was it blown up? It wasn't an explosion on board, but the yellow journalist phase, or yellow journalism phase in New York, blew this thing up. The New York Journal will give you $50,000 if you know what happened to the Maine. The McKinley administration used the war as a pretext for the independent state of Hawaii. Supporters of annexation argued that Hawaii was vital to U.S. economy and would serve as a strategic base to help protect U.S. interests in Asia, and that other nations were intent on taking over the islands if the United States did, so we should do that. That's Hawaii's new government. It wouldn't last long. The Newlands Resolution was used to annex the Republic to the U.S. It became territory of Hawaii. The Newlands Resolution was passed by the House June 15, 1898, 209 to 91. The Senate July 6, 1898, 4221. At McKinley's request, a joint resolution of Congress made Hawaii a U.S. territory August 12, 1898. Sugar lobby got what it wanted, no tariffs on its product exported to the U.S. The United States and McKinley got what they wanted, a military base in Hawaii. The Spanish-American War was taking place, and it was a war that starts on April 25th, 1898. Americans rallied to the cause of liberating Cuba from Spain with the slogan, "Remember the Maine." Spain was not in any sense prepared for a war with a formidable power. The U.S. Army was not prepared either, but the outcome of the war was largely dependent on sea power. And this element gave the United States all they needed to get rid of their opponent. Global ambitions: Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippine Islands, all are up there, and Guam is missing from that little statue, but Guam comes in as well. By July 17, 1898, the war was over, and the treaty was signed on August 12, 1898. McKinley's America became a global power, added Cuba, Guam, and Puerto Rico to its portfolio. The Battle of Manila. That's a big part of McKinley's presidency. McKinley decided, yeah, there's 7,000 islands there, let's take all of them. We need to take possession of the Philippines. The demand was reluctantly agreed to by Spain with the stipulation that the United States pay Spain $20 million, $740 million today, nominally for public buildings and public works in the Philippines. Treaty of Paris signed December 10th, 1898, conformed to these terms. Well, there's one guy in the Philippines who says, no, Emilio Aguinaldo, no, we're not going to do this, not going to do it at all. He continued his fight for independence. Widespread fighting erupted in Manila in February 1899 as McKinley pushed his program of benevolent assimilation on the island. McKinley and his advisors believed incorrectly that only a minority of Filipinos supported the independence movement. Americans set up the trappings of development, schools, sanitation, and local government to woo the majority of Filipinos to accept American rule. After the fighting subsided during the island's rainy season in the spring, McKinley offered the rebels a governance plan that included elected Filipino Advisory Council to aid American administrators. The Nationalists said no in May of 1899. General Elwell Otis led American troops into combat. In the fall of 1899, routed the Filipino army by November. Filipino forces regrouped using guerrilla tactics, and American forces aggressively pursued their destruction in the bitter fighting that followed. The Filipino problem, it is a problem for McKinley. Through 1899, anti-imperialist Americans criticized McKinley's annexation of the islands and prosecution of the war, and that was not true to the democratic traditions of the United States. McKinley holds firm. Since putting down the rebellion went hand in hand with the establishment of the American presence on the islands. McKinley had two problems, being president of the United States, presiding over a colonial empire, unrest in Cuba and the Philippines. Both wanted independence. March 1st, Congress, this is 1901, Congress adopts the Platt Amendment, which governs future relations between the United States and Cuba as part of the Army Appropriation Act of 1901. The amendment allows American intervention in Cuban domestic affairs to preserve the sovereignty of the island nation against threats from other foreign powers. March 23rd, the United States captured Aguinaldo, the leader of the independence movement. Once in U.S. custody, he signed an oath of allegiance to the United States, which ended any lingering hope of the rebellion's success. McKinley tried to convince Filipinos that U.S. rule would benefit the country, but the United States continued fighting rebel troops across the islands. Goes to Buffalo. That's Buffalo at night. What do you see in that picture? Electricity. Electricity. The modern world is coming, and McKinley is going there to boost, or to boast, about the modern world in the United States. Buffalo had money in those days. The Pan-American Exposition was a World's Fair held in Buffalo, New York, starting May 1st. The event was organized by the Pan-American Exposition Company, formed in 1897. Cayuga Island was initially chosen to host the exposition because of the island's proximity to Niagara Falls, which was a huge tourist attraction. Anybody go on their honeymoon to Niagara Falls? Not in this boat. Slowly I turned, step by step. Abbott Costello's second best routine. When the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, plans were put on hold. After the war, there was a competition between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. Buffalo won for two reasons. Buffalo had a much larger population, 350,000 people, 8th largest city in the United States, railroad connections, east shore of Lake Erie, 12 steamliners were there, and within a day, 40 million people could get there by rails or ship. Buffalo was one of the richest cities in America because of all the traffic on the Erie Canal. The last speech. McKinley was selling America as a place to do business when he headed to Buffalo on September 6th. McKinley was no longer a tariff man. Nope, no more isolationism. Has that deal in China in 1900, opening up China. Yeah, I'm looking to increase trade. He guided the country to victory in the Spanish-American War, and the Panic of 1893 was a distant memory. On September 5th, a crowd of 116,000 people filed into the World's Fair to watch McKinley give a speech. That same evening, the Expo put on a patriotic fireworks display that culminated with bursts of pyrotechnics that spelled out the words, "Welcome President McKinley, Chief of our nation and our empire." The United States was finally an empire. And here are stamps from the exhibition. McKinley's final schedule that appeared McKinley's final scheduled appearance at the Expo began the following day, September 6th, when he attended a public meet and greet at a theater called the Temple of Music. McKinley rarely missed an opportunity to meet with his constituents, but this particular event had his staff worried, some of whom feared an assassination might take place. The president's personal secretary, a guy by the name of George B. Cortelyou, even tried to cancel the reception on 2 separate occasions, but McKinley said, "Nope, gotta do it." And there he is. He was shot. Shot by Kosgaz. Despite the sweltering late summer heat, a long line of people waited outside the Temple of Music when the reception began at 4 p.m. As the theater's organist played a Bach sonata, the visitors slowly filed inside, many of them eager for a chance to meet the president and shake his hand. Near the front of the line stood 28-year-old Leon Kosgaz, a shy and brooding former steel worker, and another depiction of McKinley getting shot. He was an anarchist, and he arrived in Buffalo only a few days earlier, bought a .32 caliber Iver Johnson revolver, same type of weapon that another anarchist had used to assassinate the Italian king Umberto I in 1900. Now he waited, the gun wrapped in a white handkerchief and concealed inside his jacket pocket. It was in my heart. There was no escape for me. All those people seemed bowing to the great ruler. I made up my mind to kill that ruler. And there is Leon Kosgaz. In 1893, he was living in Cleveland. He worked at a wire mill. That year, wages were cut. There was a strike. He was fired. He was blacklisted. He got his job back the following year using a different name, Fred Neiman or Fred C. Neiman. Polish-German surname, translates to nobody. The experience left him dissatisfied and disaffected, and he increasingly focused on inequality between the wealth and workers. He quit his job in 1898, settled on the family's farm. Over the next 7 years, Kosgaz spent much of his time reading radical works, as he reportedly developed a fascination with the anarchist Gaetano Berchi, who fatally shot Umberto I of Italy over the king's repressive policies. In 1901, he became more involved with the anarchist movement, meeting Emma Goldman and members of the Liberty Club, another depiction of the shooting. He used his assumed name, and when this was discovered, the organization warned its members about a possible government spy. In the summer, he moves to Buffalo. He went to the fair on September the 6th. He was immediately arrested and soon confessed to the crime. "I killed President McKinley because I'd done my duty. I didn't believe one man should have so much service and another man should have none." He was initially thought to be part of a larger conspiracy. Several anarchists, including Goldman, were briefly arrested. However, it was eventually determined that he acted alone. McKinley died 8 days later. Republican Party leaders did not want any part of Teddy Roosevelt. They figured, make him vice president. Nobody will ever hear from him again. When the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, Theodore Roosevelt volunteered as a commander of the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, also known as the Rough Riders, leading a daring charge up San Juan Hill. Returning as a war hero, he became the governor of New York and began to exhibit an independence that upset the state's political machine. To stop Roosevelt's reforms, party bosses kicked him upstairs to vice presidency under William McKinley, believing that in this position he would be unable to continue his progressive policies.
Crazy.
Mark Hanna made no bones about it. Don't any of you realize there's only one life between this madman and the presidency? But the National Republican Party liked the idea of popular Roosevelt improving McKinley's re-election chances, all the while muzzling Roosevelt's growing populism. After McKinley was re-elected in 1900, Roosevelt was largely a symbolic vice president. Initially, it looked as if McKinley was going to survive after being shot. So Roosevelt left his side in Buffalo. He went mountain climbing in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. When the first messenger ran up the mountain to inform Roosevelt that the president had taken a turn for the worse, he decided to stay with his family. When the second messenger came up to the mountain to say the president was dying, Roosevelt immediately left. He got to Buffalo after McKinley died on September 14th. And that is the house where Theodore Roosevelt took the oath of office. He paid his respects at the residence where McKinley's body lay, and sworn in as the youngest president at a friend's home in a small ceremony in Buffalo. Mark Hanna and Theodore Roosevelt had been allies in the 1890s. They became rivals, initially due to their disagreement about the Spanish-American War. Roosevelt favored the war with Spain. Hanna resisted the war till public opinion demanded it. One of the leaders in the conservative faction of the Republican Party, Hanna lost his influence when McKinley was assassinated. Upon hearing the news, Hanna reportedly remarked, "Now we got that damn cowboy as president." Hanna and Roosevelt worked together, although they remained personally cordial, they were rivals. Roosevelt begins to enact his policies. On October 16th, he invites African-American leader Booker T. Washington to the White House. The American South reacts angrily to his visit, and racial violence increases in the region. On December the 3rd, Roosevelt asks Congress to curb the power of trust within reasonable limits. He is now the boss. The trial and execution of Carlos Ghosn, there he is in the electric chair. His trial begins on September 23rd. The judge rejected his plea to plead guilty. The proceedings last 8 hours, and defense attorneys called no witnesses. After 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him guilty, sentenced to death. He was taken to the Auburn State Prison in West Central New York, where he was killed by electrocution October 29th, 1901. U.S. Steel becomes one with Mammoth Steel Trust beginning February 25th. Under McKinley, J.P. Morgan, the country's most powerful banker, merged with Andrew Carnegie's Carnegie Steel Corporation and 9 other steel companies to form the world's largest corporation. United States Steel Corporation, or U.S. Steel, simply Big Steel, is capitalized at $1.4 billion then, about $52 billion today. The creation of U.S. Steel was a culmination of an era of American industrial consolidation that made many fear such corporations were becoming too powerful financially and political and threatened American democracy. Radio starts up here on this hill in St. John's, Newfoundland. And speaking on a cruise ship, I took a picture of that right there. The first transatlantic wireless transmission from Cornwall, UK to St. John's, Newfoundland took place on December 12th. Marconi placed his receiver at Signal Hill, St. John's, the closest point in North America to Europe. Distance of 2,100 miles, Marconi picked up the signal. This is not too far from me. It's a pizza place right up the road. Route 7, Connecticut. On April 25th, New York became the first state to require automobile license plates. It was the vehicle's owner's responsibility to supply the plates. The owners could purchase a license plate kit or make their own. The plates didn't have numbers, just the owner's initials. On May 21st, Connecticut became the first state to pass a law regulating motor vehicles, limiting their speed to 12 miles an hour in cities. There are places in Norwalk where you can't go 12 miles an hour, even if you wanted to. And 15 miles an hour on country roads. The law specified higher speed limits, but required drivers to slow down upon approaching or passing horse-drawn vehicles and come to a complete stop if necessary to avoid scaring the animals. Oh, by the way, you know how much a ticket could cost? $200, about $7,500 today. There were about 10,000 cars on the road in 1900 rather. Paul's Corner Store, SO, gas, on January 10th, drilling derrick at Spindon Hill near Beaumont, Texas, produces an enormous gusher of crude oil, coating the landscape for hundreds of feet. The American oil industry starts. Beaumont became a black gold boomtown. Population tripled in 3 months. Town filled up with oil workers, investors, merchants, and con men. Within a year, there were more than 285 active wells at Spindon Top and an estimated 500 oil and land companies operating in the area. That included some of the major players of today: Humboldt Oil, now Exxon, Texas Company, Texaco, and Magnolia Petroleum Company, Mobile. The American League is formed in baseball in 1901. On January 28th, baseball's American League is founded in Milwaukee. 140-game schedule, 14-man rosters, just 14 men per team, and a players' union. Franchises are in Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Washington. Despite its wealth, Buffalo was passed over in favor of New York. There's no team in, Boston. Buffalo's passed over in favor of Boston. There is no team in New York. The American League's formation came shortly after professional baseball's other major league, National League, contracted from 12 to 8 teams in 1899. So this is what happened and how it impacted your lives. Roosevelt became the youngest president in United States history. He was 42 years old. McKinley was the first modern president. Many of his 1896 campaign tactics still in use today, including direct mailings to homes telling people why they should vote for him. Guam and Puerto Rico are still United States territories. Hawaii became a state in 1960. Cuba in 1902 and the Philippines in 1946 became independent nations. Buffalo, and that is the monument, McKinley's name is on that war memorial monument. Buffalo never embraced its role in the McKinley assassination, unlike Washington, D.C., where President Abraham Lincoln's 1895 assassination is well documented, in Dallas, Texas, where John F. Kennedy's 1963 assassination is well chronicled. There is a plaque in a residential neighborhood that serves as a reminder of McKinley's slaying. Secret Service protective mission started after the assassination of McKinley. 1906, Congress passed legislation and funds for Secret Service to provide presidential protection. The legacy of U.S. Steel. It was a symbol of American business and industrialization, dominated the global market until the 1980s. Japan and China became the preeminent global steel makers. U.S. Steel has fallen far below other American steel companies in output and stock market value. U.S. Steel is a shell of its former self. No company, with no company among the largest 10 steel producers around the globe. 2024, Japanese firm Nippon Steel offered $15 billion to take over U.S. Steel. Jack Kemp, who ran for president in 1980, and me doing a radio interview with Jack Kemp in 1979 when I was 23. Radio became extremely popular in the 1920s globally. The decline of radio in the United States began in the mid-1950s. AM stations have gone off the air in various markets, including WFAS in White Plains, New York, The AM band barely clings to life with the suggestion the band should disappear. Radio stations used to be considered real estate, but not anymore. Radio stations have little value, yet radio could be reliable in a disaster. Esso is still in business in Canada. It's a long time ago. Free service. Texas is the top producer of oil in the United States and is also the major exporter of oil. The oil and gas industry in Texas employs more than 422,000 people. Directly and indirectly supports 1.37 million jobs in the state. Connecticut was the pioneer when it came to speed limits. Only about a quarter of U.S. states had no established speed limits in the 1930s. In an effort to reduce fuel consumption, a 55-mile-an-hour national speed limit was introduced into law in 1974 in the United States. In 1987, Congress passed a law allowing states to increase rural interstate speed limits to 65. The national speed law was eventually repealed in 1995 with the passing of the National Highway System Designation Act, which returned control of setting speed limits to states. That is Cooperstown, New York. The American League and the National League owners agreed to play a championship series in 1903. That was made permanently in 1905, the beginning of the World Series. The American League and the National League were, for the most part, separate entities until the 1990s, when Bud Selig became the commissioner. The leagues merged into one entity. Buffalo was passed over for an expansion baseball team in 1968 and 1991. Any questions, any comments about what happened 123 years ago?